You've probably wondered why some people move through life with quiet certainty, why they seem to get what they want, build what they imagine, and become what they decide, while others hesitate, stall, and drift in circles. It's not luck. It's not talent. It's not timing. It's clarity. It's hunger. It's the decision that this will happen, no matter how long, no matter how hard. Because the world doesn't give you what you hope for. It gives you what you demand of yourself, what you burn for, what you act on even when you don't feel ready. Desire starts the fire. Discipline keeps it alive. But most people, they let the spark fade. They get excited, then distracted, inspired, then scared. They wait for proof. They wait for permission. They wait for the right moment. And while they wait, life keeps moving. But not you. You've seen through the lie. You know waiting is a trap. That the man who gets what he wants is the one who moves before certainty arrives. So the question isn't, what do you want? It's, what do you want so much you're willing to suffer for it? Because desire is easy, but only decision transforms. And decision isn't a mood. It's a commitment. The kind that sharpens your focus. The kind that changes how you spend your time. The kind that rearranges your life until everything aligns with who you've chosen to become. This isn't about motivation. It's about identity. Because once you decide, your actions follow. Not out of pressure, but because it feels necessary. Desire is not weakness. It's not fantasy. It's the signal that something inside you knows there's more. That the life you're living isn't the only version available. But most people stop there. They feel the ache and then they numb it. They name the dream and then they doubt it. But the few, the rare ones, they let that desire burn. They guard it. They stop feeding it to doubt. They stop leaking it into empty conversations. They sit with it until it turns into something unshakable. And when that happens, everything changes. Your tolerance for excuses disappears. Your appetite for distraction shrinks. You start choosing discomfort because you know it's the path. Not a punishment, a path. The Stoics understood this long before we gave it names. They didn't chase pleasure. They trained desire. They pointed it inward, toward mastery, toward virtue, toward the kind of power no one can give you and no one can take away. So now you ask, what do I really want? And am I willing to rearrange my life around that answer? Because most don't. They want change without changing. They want success without structure. They want freedom without discipline. But you're not here for comfort. You're here for clarity. And clarity requires courage. The courage to stop pretending you don't know what you want. The courage to name it. To write it down. To build your day around it. To say no to what distracts and yes to what demands growth. Even when it's inconvenient. Especially then. Because convenience is the killer of transformation. And you're done waiting for the perfect moment. You've chosen now, and now demands action. You've stopped negotiating with your vision. You don't soften it to match your current reality. You don't water it down to make it less intimidating. You let it stand tall, exactly as it is. Unapologetic, unfiltered, clear. Because clarity is what you were missing. Not capability. Not intelligence, not even motivation, just clarity. And once you have it, everything you do either moves you closer to it or further away. There's no neutral. There's no pause. There's only direction. Now every choice becomes a vote for who you're becoming, for what you say matters, for the life you claim to be building. And the Stoics, they would ask, are your actions aligned with your values? Are you doing what the man you want to be would do? Not someday. Today. Right now. Because the future isn't built later. It's built in this moment. This decision. This response. You don't rise by wishing. You rise by acting. By choosing the hard path when the easy one calls. By doing what must be done whether or not anyone is watching. Whether or not it feels inspiring. Inspiration fades. Structure remains. You've chosen structure. You've stopped waiting to feel ready. You've started making readiness irrelevant. Because readiness is not a feeling, it's a decision, and you've decided that your discipline will speak louder than your doubt, that your focus will outlive your fears, that your habits will carry you through when your emotions try to sabotage you. This is not just about effort, it's about direction. You're no longer running fast in the wrong direction. You've turned, you've faced the mountain, and you've begun the climb. Slowly, silently, relentlessly. You don't talk about it. You move, you show up, you cut out the noise. You remove the things that used to pull you off course. Not with drama, with decision. Because your time is not a playground, it's an investment. And now you spend it wisely, not perfectly, intentionally. And that intention, it shows. You wake up with a mission, you go to sleep with alignment. You're not perfect, you're focused. That focus builds your future. Brick by brick, rep by rep, day by day. You don't perform it, you live it. You don't narrate every step, you take them, one after the other, quietly, steadily, without needing applause. Because this journey isn't about being seen, it's about becoming. And becoming doesn't need witnesses, it needs discipline, it needs endurance, it needs you to keep walking when your old self begs you to stop, and you've heard that voice. The one that says it's too hard, it's too slow. You're not built for this, but you don't listen anymore, you acknowledge it. Then you return to work, to structure, to silence, to focus. Because focus is your new fuel, and you don't waste it, not anymore. You've stopped leaking energy into things that don't serve the vision. You've stopped explaining yourself to people who don't share your values. You've stopped pretending that you're okay with being stuck. You're not, and you never were. But now you're doing something about it. Every single day. You've stopped confusing motion with progress. You've stopped filling your days with busy work that keeps your hands full but your soul empty. Now you measure the day not by how much you did, but by how closely you lived in alignment with what you said mattered, with who you said you are. Because anything less is compromise. And you've lived with enough of that. You used to accept distraction as a way of life. But now, you guard your attention like it's sacred. Because it is. Every moment you give away to things that do not move you forward is a moment stolen from the man you're becoming. So you've stopped giving it away. You've stopped checking what doesn't matter. Stopped explaining what needs no defense. Stopped reacting to what isn't aligned. That's not apathy. That's power. The kind that comes when you finally stop trying to do everything and start doing what matters. You don't need more. You need less. Less noise, less negotiation, less dilution. And so you simplify. You strip away the parts of your life that are no longer built for the vision. You remove habits that delay the inevitable work. You eliminate relationships that drain you, not out of bitterness, out of clarity. Because now you understand, not everything belongs. Not everyone comes. Not every idea deserves your focus. You focus only on what builds, only on what sharpens, only on what aligns. And that alignment is what gives you peace, not the easy kind, the earned kind, the kind that arrives after you've said no to everything soft and safe in favor of something harder and holier. You don't rise by accident. You rise because you refuse to fall into your old stories, your old habits, your old comforts. You wake up with intention, you train with structure, you move with precision, and when you fall, you don't spiral, you return. That return is what separates you now. Not perfection, not performance, return. You return to your breath, to your journal, to your vision, to your practices. Because those are yours. Not borrowed, not dependent. Yours. And in that ownership, you stop waiting. You stop hoping someone else will save you. You realize it was always you. You were the one who had to get serious, who had to cut the noise, who had to lead. Not for others, for yourself. Because you are the structure now. You are the discipline. You are the answer to the doubt that used to control you. That doubt hasn't disappeared. But now you move anyway. You act without certainty. You show up without comfort. You trust your preparation more than your fear. And the more you act, the more you realize you were never unworthy. You were just untrained. And now, you train. in silence, in stillness, in the smallest moments when no one else knows but you. And that knowing, that quiet, consistent knowing, builds something inside you that can't be shaken. You've stopped treating growth like a someday thing. You no longer tell yourself, I'll start when I feel ready, because you know ready is a lie. It never arrives. It waits for you to move first. And now you move. Not with noise, with clarity, not with drama, with direction. You don't argue with the moment anymore. You don't resist what must be done. You don't perform discipline, you live it, quietly, ruthlessly, daily. Because discipline, once it becomes who you are, doesn't need to be discussed. It becomes rhythm. It becomes identity. It becomes peace. You no longer crave shortcuts, you crave integrity. You don't beg for outcomes, you earn them. One small, unseen decision at a time. And that's the difference now. You're no longer waiting for something to happen. You're building the capacity to handle it when it does. Because you've learned, the man who gets what he wants is not the man who wants most. He's the man who prepares most, who practices most, who sharpens himself until there's no longer any need to prove. You've stopped trying to convince the world that you're serious. You've become serious. And that seriousness is quiet. You don't talk about your goals while avoiding the work. You don't romanticize the future while living in chaos. You bring your vision into the structure of today. That's where your power lives, in how you move when no one is looking, in how you reset instead of react, in how you get back on the path without waiting to feel inspired again. Because you're not driven by moods anymore. You're driven by meaning. And meaning doesn't waver just because motivation did. You've made it clear. You will not negotiate your standard. You will not abandon your path for approval. You will not pause the mission just because it got uncomfortable. You've trained for discomfort. You've learned to breathe in resistance. You've learned to stay when the old you would have run, to speak with action when the old you would have explained, to lead with silence when the old you would have begged to be seen. This is the difference now. You move without noise. You win without announcement. You grow without needing to be recognized. Because you've finally accepted what you want will only become real when your behavior matches your decision, not your dream. Your decision. And decisions are made in quiet places, in rooms no one sees. At times when your doubt is loud but your integrity is louder, you don't chase the feeling, you chase the truth. And the truth is, your life reflects your patterns, not your potential. So now you've turned inward. You've stopped asking for more. You've started asking, what must I let go of? What must I stop doing? What must I face in myself to become who I say I am? That is the real work. And you've begun it, not loudly, but fully. You've stopped craving the illusion of progress. You've stopped celebrating movement that leads nowhere. Now you build quietly with precision, with intention, with an eye on the direction, not just the speed. You've realized every time you broke your word to yourself, you weakened the foundation, and now you're rebuilding it, not with big promises, with small completions. Every day, every hour, every moment you choose alignment over escape, you reclaim strength. That strength isn't loud, it's still. It doesn't shout, look at me, it whispers, I'm here, I've arrived, I'm not leaving. You've stopped trying to impress people who aren't building what you're building. You no longer explain your direction to those who've never walked this road. You move forward with or without applause because your standard is not external. It's personal, sacred, non-negotiable. You've learned to stay in motion without needing excitement. You've learned to repeat the right things until they become your nature. And nature doesn't ask permission to be. It simply is. That's who you are now, someone who simply is. Disciplined, focused, clear. You've outgrown the need to narrate your evolution. You've stopped reporting your progress as proof. You don't build for attention. You build because the work is the reward. You wake early, not to post about it, to meet the day on your terms. You train your body, not to be admired, to stay ready. You journal your thoughts, not to share, to know, to filter. to refine. Your process is no longer something you need to show. It's something you embody. And embodiment is never loud. It simply exists with power. You don't need others to understand. You don't need them to cheer. You don't need them to come along. You've learned most people don't want transformation. They want attention. And you've stopped trading your discipline for their comfort. You've said no to the invitations that pull you away from your focus. You've said yes to the rituals that bring you closer to your center. You've cut ties with versions of yourself that were built to please, to perform, to prove. And in their place, you've built something real. A man who moves with structure, who speaks with weight, who walks into the world already knowing who he is without needing the world to confirm. You don't prove yourself anymore. You provide value. You don't wait to be asked. You show up. You don't seek ease. You seek excellence. And excellence doesn't come from what you do occasionally. It comes from what you become through relentless repetition of the right habits, at the right time with the right attitude. And when you fall off because you will, you don't spiral. You don't shame. You reset. Immediately. Without negotiation. Because that's what this man does now. He returns. To the plan, to the path, to the standard, without needing to be rescued. Without waiting for ideal conditions. Without telling the world he's back. He just moves. You've realized the power of returning. Not in grand gestures, but in the quiet moment when you choose to do the thing you said you would do. Again, and again, and again. Because repetition is the real proof of belief. And now, you repeat what matters, not for praise, for precision, not to impress, to improve. You no longer look for excitement in the work. You bring energy to the work. You've become your own source. Not always loud, but always on. You used to think discipline was about restriction. Now you know, it's the highest form of freedom. Because the man who can control himself no longer needs the world to do it for him. You control your mornings. You control your habits. You control the environment you allow around your mind. And because of that, you no longer feel tossed by the chaos of the day. You anchor yourself with breath, with structure, with ritual. Rituals that no one sees, that no one applauds, but that shape everything. You've trained yourself to no longer chase outcomes with frantic energy. You pursue them with calm, with posture, with a pace that honors longevity. Because now you know, this is not a sprint. This is not about hype. This is not about peaking. It's about permanence, about building something you don't need to escape from. A life that reflects who you are without needing to scream it. So you move with less friction. You make fewer excuses. You pause before you react. You observe before you decide. That stillness used to feel unnatural. Now it feels like home. You've stopped getting dragged by urgency. You've stopped giving in to the old impulse to quit when it gets uncomfortable. You've taught yourself that discomfort is a signal not to stop but to go deeper. So you go. Into the habit. Into the workout. Into the writing. Into the breath. Into the silence. Because in that silence you've found your edge. And your edge isn't sharp from anger or force. It's sharp because you've honed it with patience. You've accepted the truth. You are not here to feel good all the time. You are here to do what's good for who you are becoming, and that means you often choose the hard way. Not out of masochism, out of clarity. The clarity that says, I don't need it to be easy, I just need it to be right. And when you move from what's right, you no longer doubt. Because your actions are now in alignment with your identity, not with your emotions, not with your old story, not with anyone's expectations. Just the quiet, immovable truth you've chosen to live by. You wake with it. You walk with it. You let it govern your decisions when fear tries to speak, because fear still visits. But it no longer runs the house. You do. You lead now. Not through noise, but through stability. Not by convincing others, but by being unshakable yourself. You've stopped chasing validation, because you've already validated your mission with action, with structure, with restraint, and that restraint. That's what makes you different. You don't give every emotion a voice. You don't give every thought a stage. You hold. You breathe. You move only when it matters. You've stopped explaining your process. Because the process itself has become the explanation. People don't need to be told who you are, they feel it. In your presence, in your posture, in your refusal to move from your standard. That standard no longer rises and falls based on circumstances. It stands in the storm, in the silence, in the space where lesser men break. Because you've trained to hold tension. You've trained to say no when your old self would have caved. You've trained to stay present when it would be easier to escape. And now you don't panic when things slow down. You know who you are in the quiet. You know what you're building even when no one else sees it. You don't need to be seen. You need to stay aligned. And that alignment, that's what you protect with every choice, with every boundary, with every sacred moment you choose presence over performance. You don't perform anymore. You act. And your actions speak the language of clarity, not explanation, not justification, just truth. And that truth has become your compass. You don't drift. You don't ask for directions from people who aren't walking the same path. You walk it with resolve, with rhythm, with the kind of calm that can only be built in solitude. You've stopped expecting the world to understand your silence. You've made peace with it. And in that peace, you've found power. Not the loud kind, the real kind. The kind that doesn't need reaction to feel strong. The kind that doesn't need defense to be valid. You've become a man who doesn't announce his next move. You execute, you adjust, you repeat, and you repeat without boredom. Because repetition is how mastery speaks. You don't skip the foundation because you're chasing results. You honor the fundamentals because they build what lasts. And you've decided you're here to build what lasts, not what impresses. Not what entertains, what endures. You've stopped proving. You've started providing. Value, depth, direction. You no longer need eyes on you to feel certain, because certainty comes from knowing you're doing exactly what needs to be done whether or not anyone sees it. You don't demand praise. You demand more from yourself. And that quiet demand echoes in every room you enter. You've chosen this life. You've chosen this path. And every day you keep choosing it. You no longer hesitate when the road gets steep. You've climbed enough now to know that the incline is not punishment. It's proof that you're rising, and you were built for that. You don't look back to gather confidence. You build it in this moment, with this decision, this repetition, this breath. Because every time you choose structure over sabotage, you become stronger. Every time you follow through on what you said you'd do after the excitement is gone, you become sharper. And that sharpness, it doesn't announce itself. It cuts through everything that once slowed you down. You no longer wait for perfect conditions. You've learned that clarity comes from doing, not dreaming. So you do, without needing to feel ready, without waiting for signs, without giving your energy to things outside your control. You've narrowed your focus to only what you can influence. Your schedule, your breath, your effort, your posture, your word. You've made that word a contract with yourself, not an idea, a vow. And now you live like someone who honors their word, even when it's hard, even when no one's watching. Especially then, you no longer seek comfort in chaos. You seek order in the stillness, because the man who can stay calm when everything shakes is the man the world cannot move. You are becoming that man. You don't retreat when the doubts return. You face them, not with answers, with action. Because action is your new language. It's how you express belief. It's how you override fear. It's how you prove to the weaker version of yourself that you are done negotiating. You've moved past the phase of needing to feel like it. Now, you show up because that's who you are. Not because it's easy, because it's required. You've stopped fantasizing about what could be and started showing up for what must be. And in that showing up, you've discovered something deeper. Not hype, not motivation, but stability. A kind of inner steel that doesn't rust under pressure. That steel was forged in early mornings, in the skipped shortcuts, in the repetition of small, quiet victories that no one claps for, but you remember them because they made you. You've built momentum now that doesn't need adrenaline to sustain it. Just structure, just rhythm, just the quiet trust that doing the right thing once makes it easier to do it again. And when the world tries to tempt you back into distraction, into delay, into self-betrayal, you don't argue, you don't explain. You simply return to the rhythm, to the work, to the truth, because you've outgrown the need to be anything other than aligned. And alignment isn't a place you find. It's a place you build every single day. You've stopped checking who's watching, because now you move for the man in the mirror, not for the crowd, not for approval, not for noise. You've stripped away the need to be validated before you begin, because beginning is the validation. And you begin again every morning, not with excuses, but with action. You rise before the world stirs, not because you have to, but because you've chosen to. And that choice sets the tone. You set the tone now, with presence, with posture, with precision. You don't rush into the day hoping for momentum. You create it, deliberately, in the small things, the quiet decisions, the sacred rituals that no one sees. Because they're not for them, they're for you, for your standard, for the structure that keeps you sharp when the world tries to dull you. And the world will try, with distractions, with urgency, with opportunities that look good but cost your alignment. But you don't chase good, you choose true. Even when it's harder, even when it's slower, even when it requires you to let go of the things you used to reach for when you were still afraid to face yourself. You don't reach for escape anymore. You sit, you breathe, you stay. And in that staying, you've become someone who doesn't flinch when it gets hard. You've developed a new kind of resilience, not the kind that brags, the kind that endures, quietly, powerfully, without demand, without recognition. You don't announce your efforts, you embody them. You don't chase discipline, you live in it. And living in it has changed everything. You no longer need the world to change for you to stay steady. You are the still point now, in chaos, in delay, in resistance. You've become immune to the noise because you've filled yourself with rhythm, with reason, with the kind of purpose that doesn't shake under pressure. You're no longer the man who starts strong but fades. You're the one who begins and keeps showing up long after the mood is gone, because you don't need a mood, you need a mission, and you have one now. Clear, personal, non-negotiable, and every time you act on it, you vote for that man. The one who doesn't fold, the one who doesn't explain, the one who lives by what he said even when no one is watching. Especially then. You've stopped waiting for the external world to reflect your growth. You let your behavior prove it. And your behavior is no longer impulsive, it's intentional. You've slowed down to move stronger. You've simplified to move cleaner. You've narrowed to move further. And in that narrowing, you've found freedom. Not less, more depth, more direction, more clarity. You've stopped being addicted to intensity. Now you understand, it's not about how loud the start is. It's about how steady the rhythm stays. It's about repetition, about quiet choices stacked every day until the foundation can't be shaken. That foundation isn't built in inspiration. It's built in the dark, in the early hours, in the days when no one asks and you show up anyway, when no one reminds you, and you still keep your word to yourself every time. You don't wait to feel like it. You just do it. You've trained for that. You've trained to separate emotion from action, to do what matters not just when it feels good, but especially when it doesn't, because that's when it counts. That's when identity is shaped, not when it's easy, when it's heavy. And you've carried the heavy. You've stood in the storm without asking for rescue. You've kept your posture when the wind tried to bend you back, because you don't bend now. You hold, not out of pride, out of purpose. You've stopped negotiating with discipline. It's no longer optional. It's who you are, like breath, like gravity, like truth. You no longer expect applause for doing the right thing. You expect resistance. And when it comes, you welcome it, not as a threat, as a signal. A reminder that you're walking the right edge, because growth always brings friction. And you've made peace with that. You've made peace with being misunderstood, with being different, with being silent when the crowd screams for updates. You don't owe them your progress. You owe it to the man you're becoming, the one who knows that quiet work creates loud results. And those results don't need to be broadcast. They need to be lived. You've stopped trying to convince the world that you're serious. You simply became serious. And seriousness in this world is rebellion, because everyone is floating, scrolling, reacting, waiting, but not you. You're grounded. You're writing your day before the day writes you. You're living from the inside out, not the outside in. And in that way, you've made yourself untouchable, not invincible, untouchable. Because nothing can move a man who has chosen to move from principle. That principle holds you steady. When emotion pulls, when doubt returns, when urgency shouts, you respond with rhythm, with poise, with clarity. Because clarity is your compass now. And you don't steer from feeling, you steer from truth. You've stopped needing energy from others to act. You generate your own. Through breath, through stillness, through movement. You've become a man who doesn't need to speak to be felt, who doesn't need to prove to be trusted, who doesn't need to control to lead because you lead now from within. You've stopped trying to fix everything around you, because now you understand. The only battle worth fighting is the one within. And when you win there, everything else begins to change. You don't need to force outcomes. You don't need to push people. You don't need to manipulate timing. You align. You act. You let the results follow. And when they don't arrive right away, you don't panic. You stay the course. Because you no longer live for instant gratification. You live for internal confirmation that you are in integrity, that your standard holds, that your foundation doesn't crack just because the surface shakes. You've built that with patience, with practice, with persistence on the days when motivation left and only your character remained. That character doesn't fold under pressure now. It sharpens, it breathes, it adapts without losing identity. You don't chase motivation, you create momentum. Not by doing more, by doing what matters. Again and again until it becomes nature. That nature isn't random. It's designed by your calendar, by your habits, by the way you treat your time as proof of your values, and your values are no longer negotiable. Not for comfort, not for company, not for anything that pulls you off path. You've walked far enough to know that distractions dress up as opportunities. That chaos often looks like excitement. That popularity is not the same as alignment, so you say no more now. Not out of resistance, out of reverence, for the mission, for the discipline, for the future that only you can see but already live by. You don't wait to arrive to act like you belong. You live like you're already there, because in many ways, you are, not in status, in standards, and that standard is what carries you when the world tries to test your patience. You don't retaliate. You remain. You don't rush. You refine. You don't react. You rise, with posture, with focus, with a calm that unsettles the undisciplined. You don't explain that calm anymore. You protect it. You protect your morning, your mindset, your margins. Because peace is not found, it's protected. And the man who protects his peace becomes dangerous in the best way. Not because he fights, but because he cannot be provoked. Not because he controls others, but because he governs himself. That governance is your superpower now. You don't collapse when things fall apart. You observe. You adjust. You continue. And that continuation isn't flashy. It's quiet. It's real. It's felt by those who have the eyes to notice, but even if they don't, you notice. And that's enough. Because now you don't live to be seen. You live to be solid. You've stopped asking what's easy. Now you ask, what builds the man I've chosen to be? Because that man doesn't emerge from convenience. He's forged in quiet consistency, in invisible repetition, In every decision you make when no one is watching but everything is on the line. You wake now not hoping the day treats you well. You wake ready to treat the day with precision, with intention, with respect. You've made your time sacred because you know the way you use it reveals your truth. You no longer say your goals. You schedule them. You don't dream about action, you live it, not in bursts, in rhythms. And that rhythm has become your edge. It steadies you. It holds you accountable when emotion wavers. It reminds you that excellence is never a moment. It's a pattern, a choice repeated until it becomes your identity. You've stopped outsourcing your future to chance. You've taken responsibility for every step, every win, every mistake. You don't hide from your flaws. You meet them. You sit with them. You train through them. Because avoidance delays growth, but acceptance accelerates mastery. You've mastered the basics, and now the basics master you. They run deep, they are non-negotiable. They shape your character more than any big event ever could, because you've realized the man you want to be is already in you. He just needs fewer distractions, fewer excuses, fewer compromises. So you remove them. You subtract everything. That softens your standard. You've stopped asking, how do I feel about it? You ask, does this align with who I've decided to become? Because that decision was not casual. It was sacred. And you treat it that way. By how you speak. By how you train. By how you lead. By how you return to the work when the world says rest. Not because you ignore rest. Because you rest with structure. You recover with discipline. You refuel not to escape but to continue. You've become a man who doesn't just endure storms, you build in the middle of them. You make progress when others pause. You create rhythm when others complain, because now you're guided by principle, not preference. By direction, not distraction, and that direction is clear. It's not loud. It's not decorated. It's not perfect. But it is yours, and it is real. You walk with it every day, and even if no one ever sees how much it cost, you'll know, and you'll keep walking, because the reward is not recognition, it's becoming, and you have become.